what do you attribute to, your longevity and this romance you've had for 90 some years? The guy got married right after World War II when he came back from the war. And they said, we love, I think it was polka dancing and Malley's chocolates. So we saw this. So my brother Bill boxed up a bunch of candy and went over to visit them at their house. And lo and behold, he goes in the house. They invite him in. They want to serve him some tea or coffee. And he's bringing us some chocolates. Hey, we hear you mentioned Malley's. They go, well, yes. And then they go over to their break front, and they had a box of Malley's chocolates there. So we ended up taking their picture and posting it on our Facebook page. And there's the overflow of people just like loving the story. But, just fun stuff like that we can continue to make those connections within the community.
Let's discover what people are building in the greater Cleveland community. We are telling the stories of Northeast Ohio's entrepreneurs, builders, and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the real pleasure of speaking with Mike Malley, the president and third-generation CEO of Malley's Chocolates. If you grew up in Northeast Ohio, it is very likely that you know of Malley's Chocolates, a staple of this community, providing delicious chocolate candies and treats for over 8 decades now, with nearly 24 retail stores across the region and a modern chocolate-making 60,000 square foot factory off of Brookpark Road in Southwest Cleveland. Under Mike's leadership, the company has not only preserved its cherished traditions, but also embraced innovation and growth as it approaches its 90th anniversary. In this very fun and insightful conversation, we will dive into the fascinating history of Malley's Chocolates from its roots in the mid-1930s to today, explore the challenges and dynamics of running a family business over multiple generations, how Malley's Chocolates cultivates Malley Moments, the decision to raise outside capital in 2023 to expand the business going forward, how Mike thinks about legacy, about Cleveland, and ultimately a whole lot more. So please enjoy this very fun conversation with Mike Malley after a brief message from our sponsor. Lay of the Land is brought to you by John Carroll University's Boler College of Business, widely recognized as one of the top business schools in the region. As we've heard time and time again from entrepreneurs here on Lay of the Land, many of whom are proud alumni of John Carroll University, success in this ever-changing world of business requires a dynamic and innovative mindset, deep understanding of emerging technologies and systems, strong ethics, leadership prowess, acute business acumen, all qualities nurtured through the Boler College of Business. With 4 different MBA programs of study spanning professional, online, hybrid, and 1-year flexible, the Boler College of Business provides flexible timelines and various class structures for each MBA track, including online, in-person, hybrid, and asynchronous, all to offer the most effective options for you, including the ability to participate in an elective international study tour, providing unparalleled opportunities to expand your global business knowledge by networking with local companies overseas and experiencing a new culture. The career impact of a Boler MBA is formative and will help prepare you for this future of business and get more out of your career. To learn more about John Carroll University's Boler MBA programs, please go to business.jcu.edu. The Boler College of Business is fully accredited by AACSB International, the highest accreditation a college of business can have. Okay, so in thinking about where the best place to start might be, when I was reading about the history of Malley's Chocolate, there's something I think genuinely beautiful to me about this idea of starting a chocolate company in the midst of the Great Depression. At its most abstract, to me, it just felt like a sort of optimism incarnate and emblematic of the resilience of the human spirit through hard times, and that even when things are very tough, chocolate can bring happiness of sorts. So I'd love to just start there. If you could take us back in time as best as you can to the mid-1930s and share a bit of what your family is going through at the time, and really what are the origins of Malley's Chocolate.
Where I'm sitting now, I really wish I knew more of sort of the oral history that all the time I spent with my grandparents,
Yeah.
I never really asked them about like, well, what was it like starting a business? Because, as you're a grandkid, you're running around playing with all your cousins at their house at the holidays. You don't really think about like what a treasure trove of really just historical significance exists. So, the stories that I have and I'm going to share are really told through sort of what my parents have shared with us. And some of this may be a little urban myth, legend, I don't know. But so if any of my cousins are listening to this or people who know, they might call bullshit. I don't know. But no, in seriousness, my grandfather was from Meadville, Pennsylvania. And at the time, as my dad told me, he's got his start as an insurance salesman, but he really wasn't that good of an insurance salesman. It really wasn't his calling. So he ended up selling syrups. And back in the early 30s, late 20s, you're coming out of Prohibition era. And back in the day, there was a lot of drugstores that had soda fountains. Mm. And, nowadays, go to the vending machine to get a can of pop or soda. And that's how you get your refreshment or however you buy it at the stores. Well, back in the day, you'd go in to get a Coke or any other kind of refreshment. They would have syrups that they would mix in with the soda water, and they'd do that right in front of you at the soda fountain. Yep. So you'd go get a soda. And so he was a soda salesman, and his territory was Cleveland. And he always liked Cleveland, and he had his eye on a place to do his own shop. And he just always had this hankering that he wanted to go into business for himself. And it didn't start out with candy. So he would call on the Cleveland area, and he got to kind of know Cleveland from just making sales calls. And he settled on a building, and I don't even want to call it a building. It was he and my grandmother's home on the corner of Lewis Drive and Madison Avenue, which I think is just a fun name of a street because you think of Madison Avenue like you do in New York.
Right.
So anyways, you've got Madison and Lewis Drive. And my grandfather actually opened a delicatessen, a sandwich shop. And this is where I think the story takes on a little urban legend. But his customers knew that he liked to tinker with chocolates. So he would make confections when he wasn't slicing up roast beef or pastrami. And the story goes that some of his clients or his customers would say, and his name was Mike. And they'd say, Mike, you make a lot better candy than you do a corned beef or pastrami. So he decided that he was going to go all in and be a chocolate and ice cream fountain shop. And the thing that was really exciting for him was he had to borrow his first $500 to take the trolley car, and this is when the trolley cars were still in the city, and go downtown to the cold storage building and buy his first big block of chocolate and come back and, melt it and tinker with it and make his chocolates. And my grandmother ran the front of the shop, and my grandfather was more of the confectioner. So my grandmother was really with the customers and handling the books. And then you can also imagine at the same time they had a growing young family. So it was my father and my Aunt Helen, and they lived in this place. So in the front of the shop or the front of the house, the building was the candy soda fountain. And in the back of the house is where they lived. Yeah. So, my dad at a very, very young age, as well as my aunt, they just kind of grew up in like, this is what you do. And when you think about it, it's the height of the Great Depression. So everybody's working. So, I wish I could find the photo, but I know there's one that exists of my dad. They have an upturned milk crate so he could get high enough up to the sink to wash dishes. So, he'd be in the back washing dishes as a kid. And my grandmother would be up front taking care of customers. My grandfather would be down the basement melting his chocolates where he had his little chocolate shop set up. And the trolley cars would run up and down Madison Avenue. And my mom tells the story that her mother-in-law, my grandmother, would say to her, we always knew when the last trolley car would come down the street. So they would always stay open to just make sure they could capture the last possible customer that may be coming, home from downtown Cleveland or vice versa. So, they started to get a lot of following around that. But, and my mom tells me that my grandfather just burst with pride when he went downtown to get his block of chocolate. This is like a couple of years later, obviously. And he was just bursting with pride because they said, you know what, Mike, you're a good customer. We're going to give it to you on credit. And, that was a big deal to get credit back then as a small business owner just starting out by himself. So They started there, and where our store now is located in Lakewood, and we kind of go along with it. They always say, "Oh, that's the original," and without giving them the 5 or 10 minute dissertation of like, "No, it's not the original," but it is sort of the one that everybody in Cleveland and Lakewood recognizes as the original store. And behind that retail shop is a building that we've converted as an office space now. But back in the day, that was my grandfather's original chocolate shop, where he actually had his enrobing line and, his 10 or 15 folks that would work with him in there boxing candy and stuff like that. So, and that was about, I think I want to say, I got to look at my notes. I think I'd have this memorized, but that was about 1949.
Wow.
So the company started in 1935. So, several years later, 1949, he opened his first, what was then first all aluminum building in Cleveland, which opened to a big fanfare. They had big Hollywood searchlights out on the street. They had to have police direct traffic. So it just really took off from there. And he really made a great, great product. And we haven't really shied away from his recipes and his commitment to quality and perfection. And that's what kind of built the brand over the years. But next year will be our 90th anniversary. So, but anyways, back to the historical thing.
Yeah.
That's when we started the business. And he moved up to our Lakewood facility. And there's, I wonder if I don't have a photo in here, but there's a great photo. It looks like he's running a speakeasy. They show him behind the soda fountain, and he's got like a black, vest on, and it's, he's like the doorman or something. But back in the day, he was known quite affectionately throughout the neighborhood to make a good ice cream soda or sundae, and plus making chocolates. So from the very first, sort of birth of the company, it started as a true family business.
No, it's amazing. There are so many threads to pull on here. I mean, first off, I think lends some credence to the old advice of listening to your customer. If they tell you maybe the candy is a little better than the sandwiches, you can heed their counsel.
Right, exactly.
But I'd love to talk about the familial nature of the business. What was it like for you growing up within it?
Well, it's funny. My brothers and and we have two sisters as well, but I always refer to my brothers because I have three other brothers, and we were all very close in age. And then we had my mom and dad had two daughters. Like, I think the age span between myself and my next sister is like 13 years. So kind of growing up, my brothers and I were always rough and tumble, wrestling, playing sports. And we just thought everybody grew up with a candy shop. We just thought that was normal. And we didn't get it when all the neighborhood kids, so I'm not excluding my sisters because when they came into the fold, their friends told them kind of the same thing. But, my dad would, this is just, I can give you boatloads of stories, but back in about the 1969, we opened our second store at our North Olmsted location. Okay, so my father, it was an ice cream parlor. So during the summers, the store was open till 11 o'clock at night. Back in the day, there was always a big demand for people out in the evenings, and we just always seemed to have a lot of strong business till 11 o'clock at night. But anyways, he would go out there to do what he would call close the store, which means he'd go out and count the register receipts and do the bank deposit. That was his thing. And we just thought that was normal. So kids in the neighborhood during the summer, they would want to do sleepovers or camping out in our backyard or whatever we were doing. And then before you know it, we'd have all these kids like late at night hanging out at the Malleys to go out to the North Olmsted store. Mr. Malley would count the register receipts, and we'd be running around the store making ourselves ice cream sundaes and bagging up candy to have some fun. So that was always a fond memory. Other family type things. Again, I remember as a very, very young boy, my mom had a real penchant for merchandising and still does. And her real call is more on the operation side of the business. I wouldn't call her a confectioner as much as she's really strong in operations, merchandising, packaging design, customer relations. But anyways, we had the store in Lakewood had a small front window, and my mom really took great prides in decorating that store window for the holidays like it would be something along the other Madison Avenue in New York. Yes. It would rival, Bloomingdale's or Macy's. And so On Thanksgiving morning, when before Christmas started getting in vogue to start in October like it does now, but back in the day, back in the '60s, growing up, we would go in there on Thanksgiving morning, and my mom would, convert that Madison store and that Madison front window into the whole Christmas thing. So we'd go to the store early on Thanksgiving morning, and she'd bring a little portable TV, and we'd watch the Macy Day parade or run around the store. And I remember she'd always give me a couple of bucks and say, "Okay, go across the street to the drugstore and buy some, just like I don't want to call them presents, but just some knickknacks, and we'll make a little Saint Nick bag for everybody for tomorrow morning or something. But it's a secret, Mike. Don't tell your brothers." And my youngest brother was probably only 4 years old at the time, and he'd conk out and fall asleep on the office floor of my dad's office. But then, we'd get all packed up, go back to our house, take our afternoon naps, and then go out to my grandfather's house and hook up with all our cousins and stuff. But I can remember spending many a Thanksgiving doing fun stuff. And at the time, it didn't seem terrible. It was kind of fun.
Right.
You're with your brothers, and it's a family thing. It's a holiday. And then there's other stories where we would tease our parents years later and say, we didn't realize it, but you were probably in violation of child labor laws. What are you talking about? Well, they would go to work, my mom and dad. And,
right.
And if it's around the holidays and we're out of school, they would just bring us along. And they never forced us to do anything, but we kind of wanted to be a part of the action because it was so much action and fun. And, the plastic green grass you get in your Easter basket nowadays, back in the day, we used to sell that, a little bag of that to go along with your Easter basket.
Yeah.
Well, my parents would say, we'll give you guys a penny for every bag you could do. All right. So you can imagine we had to deal with these cellophane bags, these big green blocks of this greenish looking plastic hay. We'd have to pull it all apart, shove it in a bag, and the bags would rip. And then we'd have this old fashioned sort of ironing thing that you would step on to make the seal. I mean, it was not a very automated process, but we thought, wow, a penny a bag. We're going to make hundreds of them. Then we realized, oh my God, that was just insanity. We're down the basement of a store down there. It's like the Oompa Loompas making little Easter baskets. So, we have fond memories of that. I have fond memories of, going in with my dad to the Lakewood store during the Easter week. And I would get to man the soda fountain. And during the day, there would be a lot of traffic for that. But, the sales staff loved it because they could handle the customers in the candy case. And I would just bust the tables or make sodas and shakes for some of the customers that would come in, because we didn't see a real heavy amount of ice cream traffic during Easter week. But, it's a good way to feel like I was contributing. And all my siblings have similar stories and recollections of things like that. And then, as you get older, you would take on more responsibility or opportunities. And, in high school, we were either soda jerks working at the fountains. And for those of the listeners who don't know what that is, that's not a derisive comment or characterization, but that's what they used to be called, soda jerks, because if you look at the soda fountains back in the day and the ones that we have, they have those bent looking sort of, I don't want to call them rabbit ears at the fountain. And you're pulling the lever back and forth. And that's kind of where they got that nickname, as a soda jerk. So we'd all have done stints as soda jerks. So you'd work as a soda jerk during the summers or maybe even during the falls. And then when you got your driver's license, you would be, pressed into delivery service or, and then you got to be somewhat popular. You'd have some of your friends in high school saying, "Hey, I know you guys are ramping up for Christmas or Easter. Do you need any help at the kitchen?" So, we'd do things like bagging chocolate foiled bells at Christmas time or any other number of, tasks that need to be done. So, come home at Christmas time and you can do the deliveries, be a delivery driver and stuff like that.
Yeah. So fun. I love how fun kind of pervades everything, I think. And it sounds like what we'll talk about as well. It feels like it might be a fool's errand to ask this question to try and consolidate and capture the nuance of, all the stories that you have. But, from $500 back in 1935 to its current existence as a Cleveland institution today, coming up on 90 years, which is incredible. If you were, maybe we could phrase it this way, if you were authoring a book on the evolution of Malley's chocolate, what would the chapters of that book be? And, what would be the main focus of each of those chapters?
Oh my gosh. Well, I would think, it's a good question. I think, you'd probably, some of the chapters would be, you'd start out with a family, a tradition, a brand, bringing joy. Then you'd have to get into this, not that those things are not serious, but then you would start talking about, okay, how do you sustain this? So sustainability, longevity, how do you start managing the very real world of, the family dynamics of family governance, of how do you manage the business? Who's going to have what roles in the business? Everyone brings different skill sets to whatever task is at hand, and everyone has different strengths and attributes, and that's the trying to find those. And that's where a lot of family businesses really collapse, because you didn't ask this, but it's part of the chapters. I think the running joke is, well, the first generation launches the brand, which the successive generation would say, oh my God, that was the hardest thing, just even getting this thing going. The second generation builds the brand. And then what sort of the knock on the third generation is, and then the third generation comes in and spends all the money and ruins the brand. So knock on wood, Malley's has not done that, because not many family businesses make it to the third generation for a variety of reasons, whether it's the economy or the product or service they're offering isn't relevant anymore, or the family implodes because of the family dynamics and politics that come to play. So, as you look at the chapters, I think the later chapters would get into a little bit more seriousness, not to say that the earlier chapters aren't, but you do have to start looking about, okay, who's best suited to take the brand to the next level? I think my father, when he joined the company, it wasn't even a question. It was like, he could have done anything that he wanted, but I think he felt the calling to be in the business, and he really had a knack for it. And, his sort of background was he liked to do a lot of things. Like he liked to be involved with the advertising, liked to work with the banking on the financing. But as the brand has grown, no one person can do all those things. So, like with any company, now you've got to have people dedicated to each one of those specialties. So I'm not so sure my father would dig the way things, but he would understand it, of course. And, my mom's very strong in operations, so human resources and package design and meeting customers. But even that, we've got a dedicated human resource person now. We have dedicated retail staff. And, that's just because that's where it's gone. It's gotten a lot more, I guess, complex.
Yeah. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask then, knowing that, maybe it's trite, but grounded in some truth, that the third generation is where a lot of familial businesses may not make it. What do you feel has contributed to the endurance? You mentioned kind of the familial governance. What do you feel contributes to Malley's persisting as a true Cleveland brand that I think is kind of beloved and renowned in the area?
Well, that's really kind of you to put those attributes to us. That's that's great.
Well, I'll say, because in I am not from Cleveland, right? So I don't actually have some of these memories of growing up here. But when I talk to people that I was going to talk with you, I mean, it was universal. Everyone remembers some period of time when they were younger, growing up here, where they were fundraising for something in their high school, and Malley's is involved in a meaningful way, and they every single person has these memories.
Wow.
So I don't, but I'm channeling it.
Okay, well, that's good, because I want to talk about something you just brought up. And if I don't come back to it, remind me about Malley Moments. But when you talk about, how did we get to the third generation? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There were some, tough conversations. I mean, it's not all, not to use the metaphor of candy, it's not all sugar plums, sweetness. There's some tough decisions, tough conversations, like any business would have. But they get even harder when you're talking with people that you love and that your family, because you can have a really tough conversation with somebody, and then you're sitting there going, oh shit, I'm going to see him this weekend at, my nephew's birthday party, or it's Christmas Eve and I don't, and a lot of times, you can take the passive aggressive approach, like, you know what, it's the holidays, we're all just wound up. Let's just not address that issue. We're going to, let's just enjoy Christmas so we don't have somebody upset, but to really get through it, our parents really put a lot of effort into trying to put a board of advisors together that would guide the family, especially the third generation, on, okay, guys, what are you doing with this brand? How are you going to grow this? We got to be very business focused. What are the KPIs that are going to run the business? Just because you're doing this today doesn't mean necessarily you're going to be doing that same job in 3 years, because maybe we need somebody with more skills in that. And that doesn't make you a bad person, quite the contrary. But it means like you've got to take a focus on, am I really in the right role to help grow the brand? And so there was a lot of planning, a lot of talking, lots of meetings. And sometimes we just listen to the advice and that's all we do. No, don't want to do that. Too difficult, or we don't agree with it. So there was a lot of talk and preparation to kind of prepare as we pass the baton from the second generation to the third generation, how they want us to succeed, or actually just give us the footing to succeed. It's good to bring in advisors, and I would suggest that to anybody in a family business. You'll look at any successful family business, I can almost guarantee you they have a board of advisors, if not a board of directors that, can take sort of the family out of it and ask the really tough questions and hold people accountable. And I'm not saying that went on at Malley's, but, it's one thing to say, oh, yeah, I had a bad quarter. I didn't hit my sales number. And, you can say, oh, all right, I'll give you a mulligan. But, anybody who's in sales at another company would say, God, that's not going to happen. I could lose my job over that. And I'm not saying we were flip about something like that, but, sometimes with family, you can be a little bit more forgiving because the personalities. But in other families, I've seen it quite the opposite, where they're not forgiving and it's, boom, boom, boom. So I guess, part of our recipe for success was just lots and lots and lots of planning. It didn't happen overnight. It went on for years, of having meetings. The second generation was very thorough about, okay, we're going to give you, one voting share of stock, which, on paper doesn't really, you can't sell it at the bank, but we're going to give you a seat at the table to make a decision, to kind of get people understanding you have a wonderful asset here and you're going to have to manage it as that. It's nothing's given, and if you're going to keep taking, well, then there's not going to be anything left. So there was a lot of, I think, fundamental groundwork laid about, how are you guys going to operate, after the second generation is out of the picture, because the second generation can only do so much. So I think there was a lot of groundwork laid, to help us and guide us to where we need to, use our board for tough conversations if we're having internal disagreements. Use our board to challenge our budget assumptions. Use our board to, bounce ideas off of that are very, unbiased. And they're going to, it's like I joke, you're in a family business, and because my last name's Malley and my name's on the sign, I can walk through and they go, oh, Mr. Malley, nice suit. And I'm being facetious. And, if my name was on the sign, I don't think they'd say anything like that. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, so, because sometimes the emperor doesn't have any clothes. And if your name's on the sign, sometimes your employees aren't going to tell you that just because of the dynamic. And if you have a strong board, they're going to tell you, you're full of it. You don't know what you're talking about. That's not going to work. Or more importantly, they'll expose you to other resources to help you get more of a sounding board to help you grow. So, but, back to the other thing, and I don't know if this plays into it when you were talking about everyone sort of has these memories.
Yes. The Malley Moments.
The Malley Moments. And it's funny, our chairman of the board, Brian Gale, I think he was the one that, we talk about all these stories, and he had a lot of stories growing up in Cleveland talking about Malley's. And I think he dubbed it, and I may be giving him undue accolades for this, but I think he was the one that came up with Malley Moments. And we now make it part of our mission that whenever we have a meeting of a staff, no matter what it's about, we have to kick the meeting off with a Malley moment. And it's not artificial, and they're genuine and authentic, meaning we get enough of these stories where every week someone comes in with a new story that's like, really? well, that's a cool story. You know what I mean? So it's not like you have to pull one out of the bag from 3 years ago and go, okay, I got a story. It's something that genuinely happened in the course of and we have a weekly department meeting. So and I do them on Tuesday. So from like a Tuesday to Tuesday, I'm always surprised that we'll get 3 or 4 very genuine, authentic Malley moments. And to kind of give you a flavor of them, my wife and I recently went to Florida for a week,
Yeah.
and we weren't sitting right next to each other, but this couple was sitting in between us, and this woman opened her purse up, and she looked at my wife, and she had like snacks for the trip, and she had a bunch of Malley bars, and she asked my wife, she goes, "You want a candy bar?" And my wife's like, "Does she know who I am?" And it was just kind of funny. And as we got to talk to these people, it turns out that the husband has his pilot's license and helped his daughter get her flight hours. So he renewed his license, and she's a pilot for Alaska Airlines or something, but he's a pilot. So they always bring Malley bars when they take flights, and they give them to the pilots. So, they're like, "Oh yeah, we want to say, hey, nice job flying." So my wife finally goes, "Well, do you know who he is?" And she's pointing at me, and they're like, "We have no idea who." And she goes, "I can't take a candy bar because that's Mike Malley." And they're like, "Really?" And as the story goes deeper, it turns out that this couple they are actually very good customer of ours that my brother Bill knows. They do a nice corporate Christmas business with us. But, they had stories like, "Oh, we've grown up with Malley's. We know the Lakewood store. Every time we take a flight, my husband flies all the time. We always give the pilots Malley bars, and we're big proponents of Cleveland." So that was just a fun story. We had another kind of just the kind of customers we have at the one store, our Village Square store. There was a mom brought in some kids, and she gave the kids each, I think, $5 or $10. And she told the kids, "Okay, you're buying this." And I think it was for one of their family members who's in the service. And I may have that a little muddled. But there was a customer in the store that overheard this. And he went up to the register and told the cashier, he said, "Whatever they buy, I want you to put on my bill." Sort of like pay it forward. And, just fun stories like that. I'm not saying they're unique to Malley's, but, cool story like that. And, but we get stories like that all the time where people like either just, happenstance, you bump into them and they're like, "Oh, I did this with Malley's," or "I have this great memory with Malley's." So we start out our meetings with Malley moments. And we think that's part of our DNA that we've really got to build on for Malley's.
No, it's special. I think those are really fun.
I got another good Malley moment for you.
Absolutely.
We had this. We have this couple, and they live in Brooklyn, and it was about 2 months ago, and they're remarkable. They look fit as a fiddle, and they're in their 90s. And so this reporter from the Brooklyn, I think it was the local Brooklyn newspaper, Brooklyn, Ohio, not New York, was asking them, "So what do you attribute to, your longevity and this romance you've had for 90 some years?" The guy got married right after World War II when he came back from the war. And they said, "We love," I think it was polka dancing and Malley's chocolate. So we saw this. So my brother Bill boxed up a bunch of candy and went over to visit them at their house. And lo and behold, he goes in the house. They invite him in. They want to serve him some tea or coffee. And he's bringing us some chocolates. "Hey, we hear you mentioned Malley's." They go, "Well, yes." And then they go over to their break front, and they had a box of Malley's chocolates there. So we ended up taking their picture and posting it on our Facebook page. And there's the overflow of people just like loving the story. But, just fun stuff like that we can continue to make those connections within the community.
Yeah, those are endlessly awesome stories.
Yeah.
And you get a new batch every week. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you had mentioned the recipe for success, and I just have to use that pun because it's too applicable. But if part of that is the governance and how you've thought about advisors that you've brought in, I mean, the other part is literally the recipe for success, right? There's milk, cocoa, and sugar, which I think you've made somewhat notorious is not the right word, but people recognize that as part of Malley's brand. The actual ingredients that go into chocolate.
Right.
You mentioned you haven't deviated too much from perhaps the original recipe, and I'm not going to ask for the secret sauce, but I am curious how you've thought about honoring the tradition of where Malley's has come from, but continuing to innovate and thinking about what the customer wants. If it's not the sandwich, what what is it?
Right. That's a really good question. We want to stick to our tried and true products that have really gotten into the DNA, like our chocolate pretzels, our Billy
Yes.
Bobs, our Buckeyes, sort of the staples that people can rely on that they can always find at Malley's. And we used to do it, which come up with some new product ideas. And then we kind of got away from that pre-COVID. And then during COVID, it was just like, you know what? We just got to focus on our bread and butter staples. So, how to keep the brand fresh, I think is kind of where you're going. We're constantly trying to come up with new ideas. And part of what I'm trying, it's hard for me, but part of my leadership style is to say, okay, I want to empower the employees to really run with some new ideas. Some of them are like, meh. And I'm not going to poo-poo them because it's like, I could be totally wrong. But, we had a transaction occur back in February of 2023, which you might get to. And part of that was, it was the Malley family that always was the ones who decided what the products were. And that was really good because we could ensure brand standards and, we controlled that. But I think what we probably were remiss in doing such a tight control on that, we may not have been as opening to new ideas. So in the last 12 months, we've really kind of refocused on, we want to open this up to the employees, the customers. What do they want to see? So we've come up with some just really kooky, off the wall mashups. And, when you talk about trying to attract and be relevant to other generations of customers, nut mallow is a mainstay of probably the grandparent set. I don't even know if you know what nut mallow is, but
no, I was going to ask.
It's this slab of marshmallow and walnuts and all covered in chocolate. And when
Delicious.
you look at it, you got to cut it up in a loaf, but it's just a blob, and you go, oh my God. But back in the 30s and 40s, my grandfather had, these women who were actually candy dippers, and they would work on a big marble slab making this product. But my point is, that doesn't resonate with somebody in their 20s or 30s right now. So we're trying to come up with just, eclectic, funny ideas. Like, so for instance, we're trying to do a collaboration, or we did a collaboration in the fall with Brew Nuts, who's the local donut folks over on Detroit Shoreway neighborhood, and they've got a following. So we took some of our excess chocolate, Bordeaux scraps, pretzel scraps, and some other stuff that maybe, weren't perfect enough for a box, and gave it to them. And they came up with 3 different donut ideas. And though we had a very limited run, we sold out of them pretty damn fast. So, trying to listen to the customer. The kitchen came up, some of the staff in the kitchen came up with the Eclipse Ahoy chocolate chip covered caramel, dark chocolate, white chocolate, crazy cookie. And we sold literally 40,000 of these cookies in about 2 weeks. Now, it helped that Northeastern Ohio was just, all abuzz about the Eclipse. But, we're going to do a collaboration with Barrio, the local taco and tortilla folks. And we're going to do chocolate covered tortilla chips for Cinco de Mayo.
Fun.
And we did those like several years ago around Christmas, and we called it Feliz Navidad, and we did a Cinco de Mayo thing there. Now, are we going to set the world on fire with those? No, but it kind of keeps us relevant. We keep trying to come up with new ideas. The kitchen just gave us some candy samples Tuesday at our meeting. You should come to one of our Tuesday meetings. You'll get all kinds of samples. But we're trying to come up with something that's themed for July 4th. So our plant manager said, let's get Pop Rocks, which is that, stuff that explodes. Yeah. And she goes, let's mix it in with white chocolate, and we'll get it so it's red, white, and blue with milk chocolate that's white. And then when you eat it, it'll kind of explode in your mouth. I mean, I don't know how many candy bars of those will sell, maybe a few, but we're trying to do things like that. And then plus, we've come up with what have become mainstays. We came up with a product a couple of years ago called the Rascal, which is a almond. It's like our Billy Bob, but it's almonds with caramel covered in dark chocolate, and we just offer it at Thanksgiving, Christmas time. So we're also trying to look for new ideas like that we can launch that are very seasonal to get a buzz going, to get people to come in. So,
so fun. Lay of the Land is brought to you by Impact Architects and by 90. As we share the stories of entrepreneurs building incredible organizations in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio, Impact Architects has helped hundreds of those leaders, many of whom we have heard from as guests on this very podcast, realize their own visions and build these great organizations. I believe in Impact Architects and the people behind it so much that I have actually joined them personally in their mission to help leaders gain focus, align together, and thrive by doing what they love. If you too are trying to build great, Impact Architects is offering to sit down with you for a free consultation or provide a free trial through 90, the software platform that helps teams build great companies. If you are interested in learning more about partnering with Impact Architects or by leveraging 90 to power your own business, please go to ia.layoftheland.fm. The link will also be in our show notes. So with an eye actually then towards the future, I know you had brought in some capital at the end of 2023. You mentioned that, and I think just introduced here, how you've thought about relevance and trying to continue to innovate in the world of chocolate, and perhaps even expansion and growing the business. With the three of those things, I'm curious just how you think about what success ultimately means to you, to the business, and where you would like this organization to go.
Wow, it's a lot there. What does success look like? Expansion, capital. Well, okay. Part of being the success of a family business, my sibling, at one point, I'm one of six. And at one point, all six of us worked together in the business. And it worked. We were successful. But, we were reaching a tipping point where, and it's natural. It doesn't mean just because it's my opinion, it's the right opinion. Everyone had a right to express what they thought that the business should do for them personally, professionally, and just how much risk they would want to take on. So you can imagine if you have six equal shareholders in a family business, the question really started begging, at least for me, was, okay, guys, what do we want to do with this thing called Malley's Chocolates? I mean, are we going to make this a fourth generation play? Are we going to hire outside management to come in and run this so we can, retire? What does the succession plan look like? What does exit strategy look like? You don't want to be, as they say, the golden handcuffs where, I've got all my assets tied up in Malley's Chocolates, so I can't leave because I derive, all my income from Malley's. And, to me, that wasn't, a really satisfying recipe. So, to tie that into success, my siblings and I said, all right, you know what? Let's take a look at what would a transaction look like? What would an infusion of capital look like if some of us felt like it was time that we wanted to do something different with our lives, or, start to put a plan together? Because, the other side of this thing is, Jeff, you're trying to hire management personnel to keep the business going, but it's hard to attract people for a senior management position when they're like, well, all the Malleys have the senior jobs and there's no succession plan that we're aware of. So are these guys going to get taken out of here in a pine box? I mean, you can't really attract. I mean, we have great employees, don't get me wrong. But, if I was to bring somebody in to be like a chief operating officer, they might be like, okay, but then where do I go from there? And, do I have room to grow? And you can always figure out a way to make that happen. But if it's like, no, I'm going to be here until I'm, 80 and I get, put in the ground. And, after me comes my next sibling. And after that sibling, there's another sibling. And after that sibling, then there's a fourth generation. So, we really had to figure out, what does succession planning look like? And part of that, when you talk about success, so what did success look like for me? I was brought into the family business because prior to me working in the family business, I worked in the publishing industry for about 23 years. And when I came into the business, and I've been here for 12 years now, my mission largely was, Mike, we need your help to facilitate, and not in a patronizing way, but to help facilitate, how do we get from the second generation to the third generation? Because even though the second generation may have divested themselves financially from the company, emotionally, they were never divested. And they're always going to be your parents. So, if mom and dad call you over to their house for a meeting because they want to know what the hell you're doing with XYZ store or why you're not making certain sales calls, or they just have a ton of ideas because they were just a fountain of ideas that were really creative. And, not all of them are great, but not all my ideas are that good either. So my point is, we had to think about success as a journey to say, maybe success looks like maybe the Malleys don't hang on to Malley's chocolates. And success looks like if we really want this brand to be sustainable and to go on for decades beyond us, maybe we need to have a real sort of, self-appraisal that says we own the asset, but maybe there's other people, and I know there's other people because we know there are, that are smarter than us that could run this business. And we just have to get out of our own way and not let our egos get in the way. And that's hard to say, wow, you're going from being the omnipotent Oz, the power guy or woman running the place, to now you have to answer to bosses, but you want to believe that they're going to really bring in the right kind of thought processes to help you sustain that business. Because, at some point, we're all going to leave this business. And I saw one stat that said, Mike, with the amount of family members you have in the business, and believe me, there's other families that have way more family members in their businesses that have figured it out. So I'm not saying we're the end all, the be all on that, but it was just the path that we took. They said, Mike, you're running the risk of, there's a high probability that one of you could probably become disabled. One of you could unexpectedly pass away. One of you may decide you want to get out of the business. So we really had to work through a lot of succession issues. And then it really came to light that some family members weren't really interested in being a CEO or president. And we're happy doing what they were doing because they were happy doing that. And so as we went through all that discovery, self-appraisal, and that took years to do. That's not like hey, we have an offsite retreat next month and figure it out. But it was a journey that got us to where we were at. And so to me, success looked like we had a very successful transaction. There's no animosity with any of the family, which I think is a huge success because, we started this conversation an hour ago, I guess, and we started talking about family. And I think the most important attribute that my parents wanted to instill in us is don't let the business tear the family apart. It's more important to them that we remain a family. And that to me is like we were able to get to a point where some family members decided, you know what, Mike, if there is an opportunity for me to go and pursue some other things that I may have a passion project for, then and I can afford to do that and we can have an amicable separation, go for it. Like my brother Packy he's my youngest brother. He's in the Peace Corps. And, he's wanted to do that ever since I can remember him talking about it in high school and college. Well, bully for him. He's doing it. My sister came back to Cleveland Megan, from working in the film industry, and she still is, but she's now working in the film industry here in Cleveland. But she came back and joined the business. So she kind of felt a longing to get back into that line of work. I have another brother that he spent his entire adult professional life here and he's put a lot into it. And he decided he's going to retire and he'll figure out what he wants to do when he gets to there. So, and I got another sister who spent an enormous amount of time here as well. And she's spending time traveling and doing a wonderful job looking after my mother. She lives with my mom. So, a lot of things really kind of worked out, I think. Now, maybe they're getting together and they have a different take on it. But for the most part, I think that's what, that success looked like. Now, for me, when you say, okay, now what's the future success look like? Because I also think there's a lot of gas left in the tank for Malley's.
Yeah.
And I really want to make my mark, or my legacy is, like I like to think of it, we're third generation. So is this going to be Malley's 3.0? What's the new version of Malley's? And we have seen such fundamental changes to our business with the influx of e-commerce, trying to make brick and mortar stores very relevant, to still get foot traffic in the stores, to looking at our fundraising business through a different prism now. You had talked about it where you talked to people who said they grew up selling Malley bars. Well, during COVID, we actually shut our whole fundraising business down because we were just like, there's no after school events. There's no Washington, D.C. trips. Nobody's doing anything. So that whole business just dried up. And now it's starting to come back. But interestingly, when we shut it down, I was really nervous that, like, oh boy, we're going to see just, what am I going to do for the X number of dollars that would generate for us. But in hindsight, it didn't really generate, it generated a lot of top line revenue. But with fundraising, you're giving a good percentage of the profits back to the groups because they're trying to raise money. So we didn't really see a bad impact to our bottom line. And this kind of goes back to where I was talking about an infusion, not so much of capital, but of thought processes. And the new owners came in and they're like, hey, guys, we think you're thinking about fundraising all wrong. Fundraising should be marketing. Yeah, we get it. The margins, the returns on fundraising are not that great. But boy, you guys are out in the community. You're getting all your future customers. You're getting all those kids selling candy bars at all those schools. And all of a sudden it was like an epiphany when that was said to me, because I kept trying to look at it as a business model. And there is a business model with fundraising, but when you're giving 30% of, 30 cents on every candy bar back to the schools, and then you've got another 40, 50% that you've got to, pay for the candy bar process itself. There's not a lot left there. But all of a sudden, when you look at it through the prism of, wow, that is right. That's a great branding, marketing thing. And plus, we're giving back to the community too. We're still in the community. So I look at Malley's, as I try to get to like, what does success look like for me? I really want to come up with like, the Malley's 3.0. And one of the things I'm working on, Jeff, is, I touched on it. How do we make brick and mortar stores relevant? Because you know what? Anybody in the city of Cleveland can go online and buy a box of candy, whether it's from me or any one of my competitors. I got to give you a reason to come into a Malley store. And I believe that a lot of customers, and especially younger customers, as well as older customers, are looking for experiences. And I'll tell you what, chocolate is a fun experience.
It is.
Tours, and we had to take away our tour hall because we needed more space. So I'm envisioning like the Malley new retail footprint could have sort of in-store chocolate making opportunities, more tasting experiences, maybe more wine and chocolate pairing nights to get that target audience. We have all kinds of requests from schools that want to talk about chocolate. And what a great opportunity to talk about where chocolate comes from. There's this whole issue about sustainability from the whole cocoa industry, because it comes from either 10 or 20 miles north and south of the equator. So that's usually South Africa or, South America. And we get our cocoa beans from South Africa. But, that area of the world is really hit with just some tremendous weather issues. El Nino's had a bad impact. But what a great other opportunity for Malley's to also sort of position ourselves to talk about, here's where your chocolate comes from. It is a global world we live in, and we're all interconnected. So I look at the new retail store of, it could be a whole, mashup of, it's a learning environment. It's a fun environment. So I'm thinking there's a great opportunity for Malley's to come out and, reimagine what, the new chocolate store should look like. And, the other thing is I want to also look at, is there some new product lines we should be introducing, that would be sort of outside the scope of our brand. I think our brand, as you talked about, is really well liked and appreciated. And I don't want to get too ahead of myself and say loved, but, the Malley brand does stand for quality, value. You're going to get a good product. And I keep thinking that could extend beyond chocolates. You may see Malley's in the not too distant future getting into the snack food area, where there could be a lot of neat opportunities in that, I think our brand extensions pose a lot of opportunities. So I think, I probably said a lot, but that's kind of what success looks like for me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. I could ask you so many more questions about all this. I really love the kind of two-pronged meaning of success, family unity over business in one bucket of it, but, realizing Malley's potential, the Malley 3.0, a focus on experiences in real life. I think.
Yeah. If I can add to that,
absolutely.
Brian Gale, who I've mentioned earlier, he's the chairman of our company. Sometimes we beat ourselves up, as Malley's, because we think, oh, we should do this better. Or they might be saying, hey, how come you guys are doing your financials this way? Or why is manufacturing run this way? And you start sitting there going, yeah, that's really, and you start feeling like, maybe, we don't look as good. And they always remind me, they say, hey, Mike, wait a minute. You guys have accomplished a lot. one, you're in business for almost 89 years this year, which not a lot of businesses are even around anymore. Number two, you're profitable. So there's a lot of companies that are in business today that aren't profitable. So you guys have, handled that, challenge. And he goes, and then the third thing is you still have maintained your family unity. And he goes, you guys should feel immensely proud of that. So yeah, are there some areas where maybe you're not as professional or as polished as, one might think you should be? That's where we're going to come in and help you. So, to your point, what does success look like? I think we have accomplished a lot. And a lot of it goes to, I know it's a cliche, but I feel like we're standing on the shoulders of giants because, I can remember my mother telling me stories like, and we never saw it because I always saw my parents as the happy warriors. You would never guess if they were having a good Christmas or a bad Christmas or a bad Easter or a good Easter. They were just always into the moment, having fun. But, my mom would say, oh, your dad, there'd be many a night where he'd be like, oh boy, how am I going to meet payroll this week? The really brass tacks of what it's like to run a small business, sweating it out. Like, how am I going to make payroll? How am I going to pay off the line of credit?
Right.
Those kind of things. Like, I have a whole different level of stress, but that's what they went through to help build it.
Well, again, really appreciate you sharing all of this. I know we're coming up on time here. I want to bookend it. Well, we'll go through our traditional closing question. But if there's been a theme throughout this conversation to me that, I picked up on, it's kind of the fun interwoven throughout all of it. And so I'd love in closing, before we get to, our closing question, is just any parting thoughts you have on, things we haven't covered as a part of Malley's journey. But, to me, a big takeaway is just the fun throughout all of it, as stressful as maybe it is at times.
Yeah. It's interesting you do say that because I've asked the management team. I said, I want to get back to having more fun. I want to do more passion projects at Malley's. I need help because the stress of running the company, it's still a company, and I've got fiduciary obligations, and plus I want to succeed and do well. So that can be very stressful. But I said, I want to get to a point where I can have more fun. I want to be more in the moment. And a lot of times I'll force myself to get off from behind my desk and get in the retail store. And when I'm out in the retail store, when it's busy, like during Easter week, it's a gas. I mean, you can't put the candy on the shelf fast enough because customers are grabbing it. And then they hear you're a Malley and they want to share a story with you about how they know my parents or one of my siblings or some experience they've had. That's fun, So I'm trying to get to a point where I can be more mindful and be in the moment. I think my parents were very happy warriors, but sometimes I'm not. I haven't reached that sort of, yogi-like namaste plateau that they seem to be on that Zen moment when they were doing the Malley thing. So, but yeah, it's about fun. It's about creating joyful memories. And a lot of times when we kind of get stressed out here, because, you have to make your budgets, you got to, get product made. It's just like any other company, but I'll remind people, hey guys, what are we in the business of doing? We make chocolate and we sell chocolate. And when people are coming into our store, they're in a good mood. And then we're asking them to lay out $25 for a pound of chocolate. And they don't flinch and they're smiling about it. That's a good business. They're happy. So a lot of times we got to check ourselves and say, hey guys, put on the happy face. This is a happy place for the Oompa Loompas. So that's where I'm trying to make sure we can instill more of that joyful, camaraderie amongst all the employees, and as well as let it spill out and touch our customers.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Well, I'll close it out then with our traditional closing question, which is for a hidden gem in Cleveland, for something that other folks may not know about, but perhaps they should.
Oh, wow. That they may not know about. Okay. Well,
could be an experience, a place, a thing, food.
Well, for me, my hidden gems are, I love the park system, and I can't imagine any Clevelander that's not hip to the Cleveland Metro Parks or the Cuyahoga Valley National Park or Holden Arboretum. And I'm a gardening. I love to garden. That's one of my hobbies. So, this is going to sound terrible, Jeff, but it's kind of like sort of a hiker's, backpacker's thing. You never really want to tell them your favorite hiking trail because then it'll get overrun.
That's right. Yeah.
But I think a hidden gem, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners have taken advantage of, the metro parks, but if they haven't, I just think the metro parks are a true hidden gem. I traveled in my publishing job to a lot of other major urban centers, and not a lot of cities can boast of the elaborate park system that we have that, literally is so close to everybody in Cleveland, no matter where you live.
It's pretty magical.
To just jump on a trail and you can be transported away from an urban setting relatively quickly, whether you like to bike or fish or hike or just chill in the park. So my hidden gem, without telling you what my favorite hiking trails are, but one of my favorite reservations is the Brecksville Reservation. I love that forest.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, but I'd say the metro parks, hidden gem.
Yeah. As great of a hidden gem as there is in the area. Well, Mike, I just want to thank you again for coming on, sharing a little bit about your story. I know there's so much more we could have talked about, but I really enjoyed it and appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you, and thanks for your interest.
Absolutely. If folks had anything they wanted to follow up with you about, find the chocolate, where would you direct them?
Well, they could just email me directly, mmalley@malleys.com. I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Mike. That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.